Canada has a reputation for being polite, open, and endlessly walkable. A country of hiking trails and small towns where anyone can wander in. But there is another Canada, one that sits behind fences, warning signs, and locked gates, where the welcome mat was pulled up decades ago and never put back down. A ghost town on the coast of British Columbia, where a single caretaker holds the only key. An Arctic station so secret that even its own government rarely says what happens inside it. A stretch of New Brunswick forest where the ground itself can still kill you, more than 70 years after the people who lived there were told to leave. In this video, we are counting down 13 Canadian towns that most people will never be allowed to set foot in. Places sealed off by the military, by private owners, by contamination, or by history itself. So stay with me to the end, because number 1 is a place where an entire community was erased from the map in a single summer, and the land is still considered too dangerous to walk on. So hit subscribe, and let's begin. Number 13, Ralston, Alberta. If you drive west out of Medicine Hat on the Trans-Canada Highway, you will eventually pass a turnoff that leads to a tidy little village of bungalows, a school, a church, and an arena, all sitting inside a stretch of grassland so vast it swallows the horizon. This is Ralston, and unless you are wearing a uniform or carrying the right paperwork, you are not getting past the gate. Ralston was built in the years after the Second World War to house the families of scientists and soldiers working at what would become Canadian Forces Base Suffield, a military reserve so enormous it is more than twice the size of New York City. British troops have trained here since 1971, firing live artillery and armored columns across the same prairie where bison once roamed. The base was born out of chemical and biological weapons research during the war, and that shadow never fully lifted. For decades, Ralston existed as a company town in uniform, its swimming pool and bowling alley reserved for military families only. Today, the village still stands, its streets still quiet under the wide Alberta sky. But the only people who can walk them are the ones with a reason the Department of National Defense has already approved. Drive the public highway that skirts the training grounds, and you will see signs warning that marching troops have the right of way, and beyond them, nothing but rolling prairie grass and antelope grazing. Where live-fire exercises have thundered for more than 50 years. It's a strange kind of forbidden, not abandoned, not decaying, just quietly closed to almost everyone who isn't already inside the wire. Number 12, Indigenous, British Columbia. Deep in a fjord on the northern coast of British Columbia, closer to the Alaska Panhandle than to any Canadian highway, sits the rusted skeleton of what was once the largest copper smelting operation in the British Empire. Indigenous has no road. It never did. The only way in is by boat, float plane, or helicopter, threading through Observatory Inlet past mountains that drop straight into cold, dark water. The Granby Consolidated Mining Company built the town starting in 1912, and by 1914 it held nearly 3,000 residents, along with a hospital, a golf course, a curling rink, and even Canada's first wooden tennis court. Ore trains rattled down from the hidden creek and bonanza deposits day and night, feeding a smelter that choked the valley in sulfur smoke. But copper prices collapsed during the Great Depression, and on July 31st, 1935, the company shut the operation down for good, leaving the entire population without income almost overnight. A forest fire tore through what remained in 1942, reducing most of the wooden town to ash and leaving only the concrete dam, the slag heaps, and the smokestacks standing. What's left today is not a place you stumble into. It is pure wilderness ruin, reachable only by those with a boat and the nerve to navigate one of the most remote coastlines in the country. Salmonberry and alder now grow through the old foundations, and the concrete power dam still holds back a reservoir nobody manages anymore. Once, this valley held nearly 3,000 lives crammed onto a strip of shoreline hundreds of kilometers from the nearest road. Now the loudest sound is the wind funneling down from the mountains, and the tide going in and out against pilings no ship has tied up to in almost a century. Number 11, Cassiar, British Columbia. High in the mountains of Canada's far north, north even of Dease Lake, there is a valley where a town of 1,500 people once thrived on the extraction of a mineral, now considered too dangerous to touch. Cassiar was founded in 1952 around one of the largest asbestos deposits ever discovered, and for 40 years it was, in the words of the people who lived there, the hub of the North, complete with 2 schools, 2 churches, a hospital, a theater, and a hockey rink carved out of the wilderness. But as the world learned what asbestos fibers do to human lungs, the market for the mineral collapsed, and in February of 1992, the Cassier Asbestos Company declared bankruptcy. Within months, the entire town site was auctioned off piece by piece, more than 5,000 lots sold over 5 days, the proceeds going to creditors instead of the families who had spent decades building lives there. Most of the remaining houses were bulldozed and burned. What lingers now is not just an empty valley, but a contaminated one, tailings piles laced with carcinogenic fiber that the province still has not fully cleaned up more than 30 years later. Former residents keep in touch through old photographs and shared memories, but the town itself is one that health authorities would prefer nobody visit at all. I hope you're enjoying this journey through Canada's hidden corners so far. If you are, it would mean a lot if you hit that like button before we continue. And hey, before we move on to our next forbidden place, let's head even further north. Number 10. Uranium City, Saskatchewan. On the northern shore of Lake Athabasca, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest highway, sits a town that was once home to more than 5,000 people and today holds barely 100. Uranium City boomed in the 1950s as Cold War demand for nuclear fuel sent prospectors racing into the Canadian Shield. And at its peak, it had a hospital, a curling rink, a movie theater, and even its own radio station, all built on rock that glowed faintly with promise. But when El Dorado Nuclear closed its mining operations in 1982, the town's entire economic reason for existing vanished in a single announcement. Within a year, the population collapsed by more than 90%. There is still no road connecting Uranium City to the rest of Saskatchewan. The only way in is by small aircraft, and flights are irregular at best. Empty apartment blocks lean against the boreal forest, their windows long since broken, while the handful of remaining residents live scattered among buildings built for thousands. It isn't fenced off or guarded. It's simply so far beyond the reach of the ordinary Canadian road system that reaching it at all requires more effort than most people will ever spend on a ghost town. Black spruce and lichen creep back over abandoned streets that were once laid out for a city of thousands. And in winter, when the small airstrip closes under snow, the handful of people who still call Uranium City home can go weeks without any outside contact at all. It is a town that isn't hiding from anyone. Canada simply built its roads somewhere else and never came back. Number 9. The Dew Line Stations of the High Arctic. Scattered across more than 3,000 kilometers of Arctic tundra, from the Yukon to Baffin Island, are the remains of the distant Early Warning Line, a chain of radar stations built in the mid-1950s to detect Soviet bombers coming over the pole. Dozens of these sites were constructed almost overnight, staffed by small crews who lived in near total isolation through months of polar darkness, watching screens for threats that, thankfully, never came. When satellite technology made the network obsolete in the 1990s, the military walked away from many stations, leaving behind fuel drums, transformers, and building materials, soaked in PCBs and other toxic chemicals. Some sites have since been partially cleaned up, but many remain sealed off by both distance and contamination. Their radar domes still visible from the air like strange white golf balls scattered across the ice. Getting to one legally today generally means being part of a government cleanup crew or a scientific expedition with the right permits. For everyone else, these are structures you can see on a map and almost never in person. Fly over the tundra in summer, and you can still spot the pale outlines of old fuel tank farms staining the moss below. Tiny geometric scars on a landscape that otherwise stretches unbroken to the horizon. The men who once stood watch here for a war that never came have long since gone home. What they left behind was a different kind of threat entirely, one that lingers quietly in the permafrost instead of in the sky. Number 8. Chalk River, Ontario. Along a bend of the Ottawa River sits one of the most tightly guarded pieces of ground in the entire country. Chalk River Laboratories was established in 1944 as part of Canada's contribution to Allied nuclear research, and it went on to build some of the first nuclear reactors outside the United States, producing medical isotopes that are still used in hospitals worldwide today. The surrounding town of Deep River was purpose-built in the 1940s to house the scientists and their families, a tidy little community tucked into the pines, specifically because its distance from any major city made an accident less catastrophic. The laboratory site itself, though, has never been open to the public. Security clearance, background checks, and government authorization are required just to pass the checkpoints. and certain buildings remain off-limits even to most staff who work there. Decades of nuclear waste storage on the property have left parts of the site permanently restricted. A quiet stretch of Canadian shield forest where the trees look ordinary and the ground underneath is anything but. From the river, paddlers can glimpse the reactor domes rising above the pines, close enough to photograph and yet entirely out of reach. Guarded by a level of secrecy most small Ontario towns never have to think about. Number 7. Port-Menier, Anticosti Island, Quebec. Anticosti is the largest island in Quebec, nearly 8,000 square kilometers of boreal forest, waterfalls, and fossil-studded cliffs sitting alone in the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. For more than 3 decades, almost nobody but its owner's permission could set foot on it. In 1895, French chocolate baron Henri Meunier bought the entire island to use as his private sporting estate, releasing 220 white-tailed deer onto land that had no natural predators to stop them from multiplying. Meunier built himself a chateau, brought in fur farms and fishing operations, and turned Port-Menier into a company town that answered to him alone. Ordinary Canadians simply could not visit without an invitation from a man who treated an entire island as his personal hunting lodge. After his death in 1913, the island passed through paper company ownership before the Quebec government finally bought it in 1974, gradually opening it to the public. Today, Port-Menier is reachable by ferry and small aircraft, and the deer herd Meunier started has grown past 100,000. But for nearly 80 years, the only way onto Anticosti was to the front door of a man who could simply say no. Number 6. Nunavut, Nunavut. On the northern tip of Baffin Island, close to the eastern gateway of the fabled Northwest Passage, lies a settlement most Canadians have never even heard of. Nunavut, an Inuktitut word meaning the place where people find things, was built in 1975 around a lead zinc mine. Complete with a school, a grocery store, a swimming pool, and its own deep water port. For nearly 300 residents, it was a strange and self-contained Arctic life, briefly interrupted by polar bears and months of total darkness. The mine closed in 2002, and by 2006, the entire town site had been demolished, leaving behind only the port infrastructure. The federal government spent years and well over $100 million trying to convert the site into a naval refueling station to help patrol the Northwest Passage. But delay after delay pushed the opening back nearly 2 decades, and in 2026, the Department of National Defense announced it was shutting the half-finished facility down for good. What remains at Nunavut today is neither a functioning town nor a functioning base, just a remote Arctic dock, largely unstaffed, that ordinary travelers have no practical way of reaching and no real reason to. Number 5. Pine Point, Northwest Territories. If you drive the gravel spur off Highway 6 on the south shore of Great Slave Lake, you will pass road signs, empty crosswalks, and sidewalks that lead nowhere, because the town they once served no longer exists in any physical sense. Pine Point was built in the 1960s by the Cominco Mining Company to house the workers of a massive lead zinc operation, and it grew into a real community of nearly 2,000 people, complete with a hockey arena, schools, and paved streets laid out with suburban precision. When the mine shut down in 1987, the company made a deliberate choice that set Pine Point apart from most other ghost towns in Canada. Rather than let the empty buildings decay and attract squatters, Cominco simply demolished every structure, flattening homes, the school, and the arena between 1988 and 1989, and removing the rail spur entirely. Today, the poplar saplings pushing up through cracked pavement are the only residents. There is nothing left to enter, no building to trespass in, because the town itself was erased on purpose. It stands as one of the only places in the country where the ban on visiting isn't about a locked gate. It's about the fact that there is, quite literally, nothing there anymore. Number 4. Kitsault, British Columbia. On the northern coast of British Columbia, near the Alaska border, sits a town so perfectly preserved that it feels less like a ruin and more like a movie set, waiting for its cast to return. Kitsault was built almost overnight in 1979 by the American mining giant Phelps Dodge to house the workers of a molybdenum mine. And no expense was spared. Modern apartment buildings, a hospital, a shopping mall, a bowling alley, and a swimming pool, all crammed into a remote fjord accessible only by a rough gravel road cut through the mountains. Then the bottom fell out of the molybdenum market, prices crashed, the mine became worthless to operate, and in 1982, after barely 18 months of full operation, the 1,200 residents of Kitsul packed up and left. What makes Kitsul different from almost every other ghost town on this list is what happened next. Nobody ever tore it down. On this list is what happened next. Nobody ever tore it down. In 2004, an Indian-Canadian businessman named Krishnan Sutanthiran bought the entire town site outright, and he has kept the lights on and the lawns mowed ever since, purely to preserve it. But he has also kept the gates closed. Kitsul is private property now, and visiting requires his express permission, which very few people are ever granted. A single local jet boat operator holds the only regular access to the site, guiding the rare approved tour past homes that still look ready for move-in day, more than 4 decades after everyone left. Number 3, CFS Alert, Nunavut. 817 kilometers from the geographic North Pole, on the frozen tip of Ellesmere Island, sits the northernmost permanently staffed location on the entire planet, and it is one that almost no Canadian will ever be allowed to see. Canadian Forces Station Alert began as a weather outpost in the 1950s, before becoming a signals intelligence station in 1958, tasked with intercepting communications across the top of the world during the height of the Cold War. At its peak, more than 200 personnel rotated through 6-month postings here, monitoring Soviet missile tests and military movements from a research and listening post so far removed from civilization that resupply flights are its only lifeline. There is no road to Alert. There has never been a road to Alert. Family members are not permitted to live there, even now, and the census records its permanent population as officially 0, since everyone stationed at Alert is there temporarily, on assignment, and gone again within months. It remains an active signals intelligence facility today, tied into international intelligence sharing networks that Canada has never fully detailed to the public. For the overwhelming majority of Canadians, Alert exists only as a name on a map, a place their own government occupies, but will not let them near. I hope you've stuck with me this far, because the next 2 entries are, without question, the most powerful stories on this list. If this video has been worth your time, consider sharing it with someone who loves a good mystery, and let's press on. Number 2, Grande Grave, Forillon National Park, Quebec, at the very tip of the Gaspé Peninsula, where the St. Lawrence River finally opens into the sea. There's a stretch of coastline so beautiful that the federal government decided ordinary people should never be allowed to own it again. Before 1970, more than 200 families lived across 7 small fishing communities here, places like Grande Grave and Cap des Rosières, working the same cod fishing grounds their ancestors had worked for generations. Then, in June of 1970, the governments of Quebec and Canada agreed to expropriate the land to create Forillon, the province's first national park. Roughly 225 families were forced from their homes, and nearly 1,200 landowners in total lost property, woodlots, or farmland. A private firm hired to negotiate the buyouts reportedly used pressure tactics to push residents into accepting reduced settlements, and for many families, there was no real choice at all. Refuse, and the government would take the land anyway. Houses, barns, and fishing sheds that had stood for a century were bulldozed to make way for hiking trails and scenic lookouts. It took until 2011 for the House of Commons to issue a formal apology, and only in 2020 did Parks Canada finally begin granting free entry passes to the descendants of the families who were forced out. The park is open to any tourist who wants a photograph of its cliffs. But the people who actually belonged here, whose grandparents fished these waters, were locked out of their own home for half a century before anyone in Ottawa said sorry. Number 1, CFB Gadgettown, New Brunswick. In the summer of 1952, the Canadian government looked at a map of Queens County, New Brunswick, and decided that more than 1,100 square kilometers of farmland, forest, and century-old villages needed to disappear. On July 26th of that year, Ottawa announced the expropriation of land to build what would become the largest military training base in the country, and within months, the bulldozers arrived. Roughly 750 families, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people, were forced out of 20 rural communities with names like Coot Hill, Upper Hibernia, and New Jerusalem. Communities with churches, one-room schoolhouses, general stores, and generations of buried family history. A reporter who visited the newly created base in 1954 described it as farms tilled since the days of the United Empire Loyalists, sitting deserted, dirt roads winding past ghost villages, numerals painted on every empty house and barn to mark them for demolition. Families were given weeks to leave, their homes and lands sold to the government for a fraction of what they were worth, with almost no room to negotiate. But the story of Gagetown does not end with expropriation. For more than 70 years, the Canadian Army and Allied forces have used this land for live artillery fire, tank exercises, and aerial bombing runs, and huge sections of the base remain contaminated with unexploded ordnance buried in the soil and groundwater. Even now, entire zones of what used to be family farmland are considered too dangerous to enter, not because of a locked gate or a strict guard, but because the earth itself, seeded with decades of undetonated shells, could still kill anyone who wanders in the wrong direction. It is a haunting reminder that in Canada, forbidden does not always mean hidden or secret. Sometimes it simply means the ground has never stopped being a battlefield, long after the people who once called it home were told there was no room left for them at all. I hope you have enjoyed this journey through Canada's forbidden towns, so make sure to share it with your friends, and I will see you in the next video.